afternoon. It is my deep honor to be here with you today on this Memorial Day. Before I begin discussing Memorial Day, I'd like to take a moment to recognize some of our special guests. I doubt it, but I'm going to ask. Do we have any World War II veterans with us today? If so, please stand. That is not surprising. Our World War II veterans are catching up with age. The youngest would now be in their mid-90s. So the greatest generation is fading fast. There's only a few 100,000 left in our country today. Would our Korean War veterans please stand? Thank you for your service to our great nation. Would our Vietnam veterans please stand? Welcome home. Thank you, gentlemen. Today is not about veterans. Today is about our honored war dead. The purpose of Memorial Day is to honor and remember those who paid the ultimate sacrifice in service to our great nation. We can and should remember the honored, brave Americans who gave their lives for our country by being the best Americans we can be today and every day. When looking at where our nation is today, we must take a few minutes to remember our past. Think about this. Our nation has been in existence just over 240 years. During that entire time of over 240 years, we've been at peace less than 20 of those years. 95% of the time that we've existed as a nation, our military has been in a state of conflict or war. Freedom is not free. It has been bought with the blood of our heroes. Let's reflect on a few examples. The first time Americans spilt blood as American patriots was 19 April 1775, the Battle of Lexington and Concord. No longer were the colonies fighting for the king and the crown, they were fighting to be free Americans. 90 men gave their lives on those fields that day, our first American war dead. During the War of 1812, 13-14 September 1814, the British had taken our nation's capital and burned Washington. Their next target was to attack the city of Baltimore. Fort McHenry guarded the harbor. Major Armistead, with 1,000 Americans, manned the fort. 19 British warships positioned around the fort and bombed the fort for continuously 24 hours. The British expected fully to see a white flag of surrender flying above Fort McHenry when the sun came up. Instead, against all odds, what they saw was a torn and tattered Star-Spangled Banner still flying above Fort McHenry. The attack had failed. The British never took Baltimore. That story of American courage and pride is our national anthem that we hear all the time. 28 Americans gave their lives at Fort McHenry. 1 through 3 July 1863, not far from here in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, in our Civil War, 7,058 Americans lost their lives. The numbers were so high because both sides were Americans fighting. 3,155 died for the Union, 3,903 died for the Confederacy. 26 September through 11 November 1918, in the Meuse-Argonne Offensive of World War I, 26,000 Americans died to liberate Europe. 7 December 1941, the day that will live in infamy, the day that the Empire of Japan launched an unprovoked and unwarranted attack on our Pacific Fleet sitting at anchor in Pearl Harbor. 2,403 were killed that day. Don't worry, I'm not going to go through every battle that the United States has fought, or we'd be here a long time, but just to highlight a few. That attack on Pearl Harbor thrust the United States into World War II. During the period of 6 June through 25 August 1944, in the Battle of Normandy in World War II, 29,204 Americans were killed in action in Normandy, France. D-Day, 6 June 1944, was the single deadliest day in American military history. 2,811 Americans gave their lives on that day alone. The United States did not fight to conquer Europe. The United States fought to liberate Europe, to liberate it from the oppressions of Nazi Germany, to liberate the Pacific from the evils of the Empire of Japan. I'm going to real briefly tell you about one such example. 10 July 1944, the United States resumed the drive to capture the city of Saint-Lô, France. The key piece of terrain outside of the city was Hill 192, heavily defended by hardened German soldiers. The 38th Infantry, 2nd Infantry Division, with Sherman tanks of the 741st Tank Battalion assigned to them, were given the mission to take Hill 192 so Saint-Lô could be liberated and the Allies could break out of Normandy and conquer Germany. At 5:40 in the morning on 11 July, the United States artillery began heavy shelling of the defensive positions on Hill 192. 25,000 rounds were fired on the German positions that morning. At 0600, the ground attack was initiated with 6 Sherman tanks of Alpha Company, 741st Tank Battalion leading the assault. The tanks were attacking up the highest and steepest part of Hill 192 over soggy ground. It was overcast and foggy when that attack began on 11 July 1944. All 6 of the attacking Sherman tanks were immediately destroyed by direct German fire within minutes of crossing the line of departure. These one main lead tank took a direct hit from a German rocket. Several additional explosions followed. The tank was engulfed in flames and smoke. One man, the bow gunner, Private Buchanan, somehow escaped and survived the attack. The Army reports stated that the other 4 crew members were killed instantly. Those 4 crew members were Staff Sergeant Fair, Tech 4 Nixon, Private Perkins, and my uncle, Corporal Frank Pasqualini. He was killed in action that day in 1944. Shortly before he died, he wrote a letter home to his young son Bobby, who lived not far from here in Katanning, Pennsylvania. Part of that letter says, "I miss you a lot, son. Be a good soldier for Mommy. When I get home, I'm going to buy you the best puppy dog there is. Love, Daddy." My Uncle Frank never made it home. He never got to see his son Bobby again. Every one of these numbers that I'm telling you about American war dead was somebody like my Uncle Frank. These aren't numbers. These were real human beings with family and loved ones, hopes and dreams and plans. And yet they made that ultimate sacrifice for the defense of freedom. A few other ones. 27 November through 13 December 1950, at Chosun Reservoir, Korea. 1,029 were killed in action. 30 January 1968, the Tet Offensive in Vietnam. 1,145 Americans died. More recently, 11 September 2001, 2,977 lives were lost. These were not all military personnel. Some were children in a daycare center at the Pentagon. Some were people working at the World Trade Center in New York City. Some were families going to visit their loved ones on a plane over the fields of Pennsylvania. As a result of that attack, our nation has been at a war, a global war on terror, for the last 20 years. Our military serves to protect our country, but yet we have a citizen military. We don't have a draft. It's an all-volunteer military. Why do people serve? Why do citizens serve in the United States? I'd say there's many reasons. The number one is patriotism. Patriotism is love and vigorous support for one's country. Why? Why do Americans support the United States? Our Constitution defines our nation. Every person that's worn this uniform has taken an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States of America against all enemies. Not to a king, not to a dictator, not even to a president, to the Constitution. That's why we fight. The Constitution was written in order to form a more perfect union, to establish justice, to ensure domestic tranquility, to provide for the common defense, promote general welfare, and to secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. Not only for our current generation, we fight to secure the blessings for our future generations. For over 240 years, our great national experiment of government of the people, by the people, and for the people has endured, as we heard just a little while ago in the Gettysburg Address, the famous words of President Abraham Lincoln. Our country is not perfect. We've made mistakes in our past. We must learn from our mistakes and learn from our history. Our Constitution said we were trying to form a more perfect union. We always strive to be better than we were. We've made mistakes, but we must always remember the principles of the United States are flawless. The principles of equality, individual rights, liberty, democracy, and opportunity. President Reagan said it best: America is a shiny city upon a hill whose beacon light guides freedom-loving people everywhere, blessed by God and teeming with all kinds of people living together. Our differences as a nation are what makes us a great nation. Blacks and white, Christians and Muslims, males and females, gays and straight, even Democrats and Republicans. We're above all else Americans. First and foremost, we are Americans. Our differences and our diversity makes us a stronger nation. We must also remember President Kennedy said, "Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country." Remember, we have an all-volunteer military today. Less than 1% of the American population serves in uniform. Please remember, encourage our youth to join. Encourage them to consider military service. Last year, the United States Army was 15,000 short of our recruiting goals. We have to get the new generations to serve as well. Remember, we have the most powerful military the world has ever known. Our military is global. We fight over there so that we don't have to fight here at home. Think about this. It has been over 200 years since a foreign army has invaded our nation when the British took Washington, D.C. How many countries can say they haven't been invaded by a foreign military in over 200 years? Very few on this earth. It's because of the strength of our military. Remember, our flag does not fly because the wind moves it. It flies with the last breath of every soldier who died protecting it. I mentioned there were no World War II veterans here. I do want to say that the greatest generation made a huge difference for our nation. We must never forget that. If you're fortunate enough to have the opportunity to talk to a World War II veteran, listen to their stories. Listen to what they did. Over 14 million Americans served in World War II. Over 400,000 never came home. They were killed in action. This indeed was our greatest generation. General Patton said it best about the greatest generation: "It is foolish and wrong to mourn these men who died in defense of our nation. Rather, we should thank God that such men lived." Indeed, that is the greatest generation. As I close, before I stop, in addition to our military heroes, I'd like to pause for a moment and recognize the sacrifices of our public servants who died in the line of duty. Our fire, our police, our EMS, our government civilians, our diplomats, our intelligence officers. I bring those up because sometimes we forget. Ambassador Chris Stevens was killed on the attack at the base in Libya, in Benghazi, Libya. The United States ambassador killed in the line of duty. Mike Spann was a CIA officer, the first American killed in Afghanistan after the September 11th attacks. These two men were two of my friends. They also gave their lives in defense of freedom. Please enjoy this holiday with your family and friends. It is a beautiful day. But please always remember why we have this holiday. It is to remember the ultimate sacrifice of our heroes who made our country possible. God bless you all, and may God continue to bless the United States of America.